Well, I'm back and I have missed you all. So I'm just catching up with the UK news. So what's been happening? All this Farage stuff with the throwing the milkshake, that gives me a few jumping off points. The first thing is, some people asked, well, this lassie was misidentified as the potential thrower of the milkshake. Could she have a defamation claim? Well, yes, she could, because she had been misidentified as committing an offence, because obviously throwing a milkshake over somebody, that's common assault, which is a criminal offence, attracts a penalty of up to 6 months imprisonment, although that will become relevant. So you have to be very careful about this when you're sort of suggesting people, may be involved in crime. I mean, this was just a mistake, but she had been misidentified, she'd actually been named, and people had accused her of a crime. They'd actually said, this is the lass who did it. Or even if they said, maybe this is the person that did it. Because when it comes to accusing people of bad behaviour, especially crime, in defamation we have what we call chase levels. We have chase levels 1 to 3. Chase level 1 is, yes, they definitely did it. Chase level 2 is, there are strong grounds for suspecting somebody did it. And chase level 3 is, there are grounds for investigating whether this person did it. I mean, sometimes we say that's more of a spectrum. Sometimes in cases you'll say, oh, this is chase level 2.5 or something like that. So yeah, this was an allegation of an offence. However, in defamation, you have to initially prove that the defamation has either caused or will tend to cause serious harm. If you're a business or in a commercial situation, that's serious financial harm. But if you're an individual, what can it be? If you accuse somebody of an offence that can attract a sentence of imprisonment of 12 months or more, that is usually deemed to be evidence that it would tend to cause serious harm because you've been accused of a serious offence. In this case, though, like I say, the maximum penalty for a common assault is 6 months. So it wouldn't automatically cross the threshold. So what other harm could she show? Well, it's very common now in social media defamation cases to say, well, my name's been bandied around there. Everybody's like commenting on me on social media, people reporting me to my bosses, people harassing me in the street, people are going, oh, you're that person who did this, that and the other. That can be serious harm. However, you have to prove it with evidence. You can't just say, look, it's obvious this is what is going to happen. That's the old thing where you could say it's clearly defamatory per se because this sort of thing would cause sort of harm. But now you've actually got to prove it. And how do you do that? A lot of the time you just put in sort of the evidence and go, look, here's loads of people on social media slagging me off or harassing me, especially if people are actually tagging them into it. Although the mere fact that you don't necessarily copy the person in, you're just talking about them effectively behind their back, albeit in public. There's a case I remember years and years and years ago where a guy had fallen out with a court reporter because he said she'd faked the transcript, and he just took it on his career for the rest of his life to try and harass this poor woman. And he would write to her employers and things and say, look, this woman's really dodgy. But he would put in there, don't tell her. So when he was prosecuted for harassment, he said, well, hang on, how can I be harassing her? I've said to these people not to pass on this information. And therefore, the fact that they've told her that, I'm sending all these letters, that breaks causation. So it's their fault that she is being harassed. But the court said, well, no, because of course it's reasonable if your employer gets something to say, well, hang on a minute, what's all this about? So, yeah, I mean, potentially she does have a defamation claim. I mean, whether she thinks it's worth pursuing. I mean, now that the alleged proper offender has been arrested, then arguably, it was a storm in a teacup. As we always say in defamation, today's headlines, tomorrow's fish and chip papers. So if she's got any sense, she'll probably leave it alone. What about all these people commenting, saying, well, he deserved it, and why is she being prosecuted, and all this sort of thing? I've seen a lot of people saying, well, what if somebody did that to you? Now, presumably, you're saying that you don't mind if we throw something over you. Is that the case? Have they consented to having milkshakes thrown over them because they said somebody else deserved it? Probably no. You can consent to an assault. However, you can't consent to an assault if it's for an unlawful purpose. So let's say, for instance, it would be assault if you went up and squirted somebody with a water pistol. But if you're just running around having fun, spraying each other, just out in the garden on a hot summer's day, then you have all consented. And there's nothing unlawful about having fun. Similarly, you can consent to assaults for having your ears pierced, having tattoos. There's an interesting case though where it's, can you consent to a brand? There was a couple who, they had sort of mutual brands, sort of saying, in the same way you might have a tattoo of your girlfriend's name, they actually had brands. And then that went to court and they said, well, no, you can't. Initially they said you can't consent to branding because that's very serious harm. There's a famous case called Crown and Brown and Others, which was, can you consent to a GBH? Because that was some guys who had some very extreme practices. I'll just let you Google that because I think, first of all, the algorithm would not like me going into details, and also be forewarned. You will read that law report and you'll probably be crossing your legs and wincing a little bit. I mean, I'm a big fan of bodily autonomy. So, I personally think you should be allowed to consent to harm, to even serious harm. You can consent to the risk of serious harm. Say in a boxing match, you are consenting to assault. You're also consenting to ABH, actual bodily harm, because obviously being punched really hurts you. But you're not consenting to grievous bodily harm, like you couldn't have sort of gladiatorial combats or jousting or anything like that, but you can consent to the risk. And this crops up in sports games like, sort of like rugby and things like that, where you are consenting to the risk of a bad tackle that could, really, really severely injure you, but you're not consenting to, people being allowed to do that. And that is why people have actually been prosecuted for, in football there's a case where somebody was prosecuted for coming in with a really dirty high tackle. Although, as somebody who was a bit of a fan of the 1970s Leeds team, I was like, oh, yeah, snowflakes, what's wrong with that? So yeah, the mere fact that people are saying, I think he deserved it, and, they're not opening themselves up. So, if you go out and say, well, you said you didn't have a problem with somebody else getting splashed with a milkshake, so we're going to splash you with a milkshake. Don't do it. I'm also going to get a bit political here. I mean, I always try to be very objective and not put my views in. But why am I saying this? Well, I've just got back from Sierra Leone, which is an amazingly wonderful country. It's a very easy country to fall in love with. And I have very much fallen in love with the place and the people because they are wonderful. But you may remember, not that long ago, there was a really horrible civil war in Sierra Leone. And while we were over there, we went to the war crimes, the war crimes court, which they're now rigging out as a museum because, it's the old thing that they need people to, first of all, not forget what happened. Because that's the trouble, if you don't keep these things alive and record these things, eventually you get to the stage where people forget it happened or people denied it happened. And we saw some horrible exhibits. I mean, it was bad enough reading they've preserved all the witness evidence, they've preserved all the testimony, and they're actually scanning it and digitising it, which is an amazing project. It's basically something like law students and interns and people, volunteers, just scanning like thousands and thousands of pages of evidence. But we also saw some photographs. Now, I am pretty inured to this. I once used some crime scene photographs to pick out some kitchen cabinet doors. I just went in and said, I want it to look like that. And the guy went, presumably without the body. It's like, oh yeah, just the doors. But so, you do get very inured. But these were absolutely horrendous photographs of what had gone on there. And also just some of the exhibits. There's nothing where we see like exhibits, blah, 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 27A, human skull, human bones, to see the sort of like injuries on them. So why am I saying that? Well, the thing is, I know people are going to go, oh, well, it's Africa, what do you expect? But, Sierra Leone was a it's a very civilized country. They're very nice people. They're lovely people. But they got engaged in this civil war. And it didn't start out with sort of, machetes and people shooting each other in the street. It all started out with people first of all, it started out with just words. I mean, the key way to, start something like this is to start dehumanizing people and suggesting that, you know, they are not worthy of protection, or that somehow, you know, they're so beyond the pale, it's okay to do what you want with them. And it started out, you know, low key. It started out very low key. And there's a few cases like this. Rwanda started out like this, and there were prosecutions, there were war crimes prosecutions against people, radio commentators, because they had just started out. They didn't actually take part in any of the atrocities, but they just promoted a sort of zeitgeist of, you know, these people do this, these people do that. And, you know, they just basically dehumanized them and said, well, it's okay because they're our political enemies. You don't have to care about them. I mean, this goes all the way back to Goebbels, doesn't it? There's nothing new there. But if I remember, I'll put up what, you know, the causes, because there was a big inquiry, a big truth and reconciliation inquiry afterwards, because it wasn't just about prosecuting the people responsible, it was about investigating how this had occurred. And they put up a list of, you know, the causes of the civil war. And like I say, I'll put that up either that side or that side, depending on how I frame this. And just go down that list and you know, start ticking things off and see if it reminds you of any countries. So that's why, like I say, you know, there's lots of people, you know, I have used the phrase, you know, a face you could never tire a punching about a few people, but, you know, not publicly. And, you know, this is the danger. You know, I mean, people said, oh, well, you know, it's milkshakes now, then it's petrol bombs, then it's this. And, you know, there is a lot of truth to that. There is a lot of truth to that. It can all escalate because it just spirals out of control. So what I would say is, just generally, please be very careful about this and have a thought. I'm not telling people what to do, I never do. But I have to say, as somebody with a bit of a, you know, an interest in, you know, war crimes generally, and political violence, it is slightly worrying when I look at some of the sort of parallels from history. So, you know, just saying, folks, you know, be kind, calm it down, you know. As somebody who, you know, argues for a living, you know, and tries to persuade people for a living, I think generally speaking, if you're getting to the stage where you're having to use violence, you've probably lost the argument. So there you go. Well, on that cheery note, I hope you found that, as always, vaguely useful, vaguely interesting. I'd say vaguely accurate, but I wasn't really talking about anything. Oh, no, there was some law at the beginning, wasn't there? So yeah. Oh yeah, like, subscribe, share, all that sort of thing. And where am I today? I'm back in Frogpool. And interestingly, I asked in the comments and said, does anybody know why, you know, was there a frog pool? And somebody pointed out, yes, and it was over there, but they built some bungalows on top of it. I hope they move the frogs out first. But yeah, it's great to be back. I'll probably tell you more about my adventures and misadventures in Africa. But until then, it's great to see you all again. And please feel free to comment in the comments section about this, because I'd be very interested in your thoughts. I mean, like I say, I don't claim to be infallible, so if people have a different view, I'd be very interested to hear it.